بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وألهمنا رشدنا يا رب العالمين. Alhamdulillah, we're right at the end of the section on prayer, um, and we're looking at the ahkam of the shaheed. So he says, rahimahullah ta'ala, Imam Abu al-Hafs Hassan ibn Ammar al-Shurunbulali rahimahullah ta'ala, ويغسل إن قتل جنبا أو صبيا أو مجنونا أو حائضا أو نفساء أو ارتث بعد انقضاء الحرب. Right? So, and that's the ويغسل الشهيد عند الإمام إن قتل جنبا. Right? So the shaheed is washed according to the Imam if they were killed in a state of janaba. لأن سيدنا حنظلة ابن الراهب استشهد يوم أحد وقال عليه الصلاة والسلام إني رأيت الملائكة تغسل حنظلة ابن أبي عامر بين السماء والأرض. Right? So the Prophet ﷺ said that truly I have seen the angels washing Hanzala ibn Abi Amir between the heavens and the earth. بماء المزن في صحائف الفضة. Right? In heavenly water, in containers of silver. Right? And there's al-muzun is either literally بماء المزن, by cloud water, right? Right? Or it refers to white clouds, or it can refer to that which is heavenly. Right? 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 So the reason being that, okay, Hanzala was not washed, but that is because the angels washed him, right? And that's a khususiyya. But so that establishes that the mayyit, the shaheed, who is junub, needs to be washed, even if done by, and of course, it being done by the angels is not known to us, right? قال أبو أسيد فذهبنا ونظرنا إليه فإذا برأسه يقطر ماء. So Abu Usaid says, so we went and looked and we found, right? And this فإذا indicates fuja'a, right? And the surprise that his head was actually dripping with water. فأرسل النبي صلى الله تعالى عليه وسلم إلى امرأته فأخبرته أنه خرج وهو جنوب. So the Prophet ﷺ went forth and to his wife to inform her of what happened, and she told him that he went out in a state of janaba. أو صبيا أو مجنونا, or a child. Why a child? Right? Right? أو مجنونا لأن السيف كفى عن التغسيل في من يوصف بذنب. Right? Because the sword, that's the wisdom underlying why the martyr, right? Because the martyr dies without sin. So that's, and they are honored because of their fulfilling their duty. So there's two primary meanings, right? لأن السيف كفى, because the sword, i.e. they're giving their life, was a sufficiency from having to be washed, right? Which, there's a physical washing, but spiritually, washing washes away their sins, right? And that washing is done for one who would be characterized by sin. وَلَا ذَنْبَ لَهُمَا, and there's no sin for the child or the one who is majnoon. فَلَمْ يَكُونَا فِي مَعْنَى شُهَدَاءِ أُحُدٍ, so they don't have the meaning of the martyrs of Uhud, right? Or the asl in the bab, that the martyrs of Uhud were washed and um, um, despite being martyrs, right? So that's the asl. And then we say, okay, what about Hanzala? He wasn't washed, well, because the angels washed him, right? And the Prophet informed of that. So that's waqi'at hal. Right? And there's other similar potential waqa'i'ul hal, right? That in a situation where they're in battle and they weren't able to wash them, for example. So there's individual instances, but the asl is what happened at Uhud and many other supporting usul. أو قتل حائضا أو نفساء, or someone was killed as a حائض or نفساء سواء كان بعد انقضاء الدم أو قبل استمراره في الحيض 3 أيام في الصحيح, or someone was killed as a حائض or a نفساء, whether this was after the bleeding stopped or before it lasted in the haid for 3 days, right? According to the sound opinion. وَالْمَعْنَى فِيهِمَا كَالْجُنُوب, and the meaning in it is like the junub, to pray over them in a state of physical purity, right? أو ارتث, يعني بالبناء المجهول أي حمل, or someone who lived on beyond the battle, right? أي حمل عن المعركة رثيثا, أي جريحا, someone who was wounded and lived on after the battle. Right? So they're carried away from the battle, actually or effectively, right? Um, right? أي جريحا وبه رمق, right? They're carried away, wounded, and they have life. And they have life. And this is where it's good to pick up this vocabulary, right? Right? Ramaq is baqiyatu hayat, right? It's remnants of life. كذا في الصحاح. This is what's mentioned in the Sihah. Right? And Tahtawi, of course, frequently quotes the Qamus. The Qamus al-Muhit is a marvel. The Qamus al-Muhit is a marvel. It is said that initially he wrote it in over 100 volumes, right? Or large, and volumes, of course, they mean also tomes, right? In a very large number. And it was dazzling. But his students said to him that, Sayyidi, I don't know if he'd finished it or done a part of it, but they told Feroz that who's going to be able to, this is dazzling, but who's going to be able to truly benefit from it? So he refined it till it was reduced to 4 volumes. And the 4 volumes are frequently published as 4 volumes in 2 in the older editions, or 4 volumes in one chunky micro volume, right? But it's important in your journey of learning Arabic to learn how to use these dictionaries, right? Because each has its khasa'is, each has its method, etc. And the ulama, they even wrote, different things on how the various major dictionaries, right? And their usages. ويسمى مرتثا لأنه صار خلقا في حكم الشهادة. And they're called مرتث because they are now as if they are martyred, right? بما كلف به من أحكام الدنيا, right? Right? So they're worn out from خلقا أو خلفا. Of what they are now responsible for of worldly rulings. أو وصل إليه من منافعها, or what they acquire now of worldly benefits, right? Because some worldly rulings apply to them. Because let's say they were wounded in battle and they lived on, so worldly rulings apply. They lived on to the next prayer time, so they have to pray. They got medical treatment, right? And these worldly rulings apply. They're lived on, so they're able to make a wasiyah. They're able to write out their will, etc., etc. So these are worldly rulings that apply to them. So they didn't actually die in battle, right? Even though they lived on, they're wounded, they have their shuhada al-akhirah. But the worldly rulings don't apply because they lived on after it. بعد انقضاء الحرب, after the battle ended. Right? So they lived on, wounded, after the battle ended. فسقط حكم الدنيا. So the worldly rulings are lifted. Right? وهو ترك الغسل. And the key worldly ruling is that that ghusl is not done for them. فيغسل, so they're washed. من ارتث يغسل. And those who are wounded in battle and live on and then die, they are washed. وهو شهيد في حكم الآخرة, but they're a martyr with respect to the hereafter. And then there's the discussion, do they have the full reward or their partial reward? And the madar of that is upon the intention. Right? 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 And Maulana Tahtawi summarizes some of the key people who are considered shuhada of the akhirah, right? Those who who gave themselves for the sake of Allah, right? There's many categories of people, right? Right? Even, that's why they say in the that the one who seeks a lawful provision, for example, to support their family, and who seeks a lawful provision, right? Says that it's faridatun ba'd al-fara'id, right? And is there fi sabilillah, the one talab al-halal, faridatun ba'd al-fara'id, which is someone sought a lawful living, right? So they earned in a halal way, and they avoided the haram in their earnings, they avoided the haram in their spending, and they raise their family on on faith and on establishing the prayer and the command of Allah. Such a person is a martyr, and that's a good discussion in so the door of that is vast, and we talked about that last class, so you can review your notes on that. Right? له الثواب الموعود في للشهداء. So they have the reward that is promised the martyrs. And we don't go into accounting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? But الظاهر is the full reward. ولو ارتث بأن كان أكل أو شرب أو نام ولو قليلا أو تداوى لرفق الحياة أو مضى عليه وقت الصلاة وهو يعقل بقدر أدائها إذ لا يلزمه بدونها بدون قدرة فمع العجز لا يغسل أو نقل عن المعركة حيا ليمرض لا لخوف وطئ الخيل أو الدواب فإنه بهذا لا يكون مرتثا أو أوصى عطف على قوله أكل سواء أوصى بأمر الدنيا أو الآخرة عند أبي يوسف وقال محمد لا يكون مرتثا بوصيته بأمور الآخرة وقيل الخلاف في أمور الدنيا. And he continues. So who is considered to have lived on wounded after the battle? Right? He says, such that they ate or they drank or they slept after the end of the battle. So the battle ended. After the end of the battle, they ate, drank, or slept, or they engaged in medical treatment, right? 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 لرفق الحياة, because this indicates living on, right? So Maulana Tahtawi, he comments on it. يعني لرفق الحياة, رفق here refers to مرافق, أي لنيل بعض مرافق أي منافع الحياة. رفق refers to gentleness, but here rifq is from marafiq, which are some of the benefits. Right? الأولى بنيله شيئا من مرافق الحياة. Right? Because they attain some things of the marafiq, the benefits of living on. كما في الشرح, as in the imdad. أو مضى عليه, or entire prayer time passes them after the battle in a state of consciousness, right? And they were able to pray, right? Because without it, so they lived on, but they did nothing else. So they lived on, unable to pray. Then, because the prayer is not required if they did not have the ability to pray, right? So they're completely paralyzed, right? Because then they didn't have the sense that they lived on, and if they neither ate, drank, nor even slept, nor medical treatment, the time of prayer passed, and they're able to pray, right? Um, because otherwise they didn't live on in the sense of, the ahkam of dunya having applied to them in one way or the other, whether purely worldly rulings or next worldly rulings, such as the prayer. فمع العجز لا يغسل. So if they remain incapable, so the battle ended, so we left rain on the battlefield, right? And he was just there, right? Awake. So I said, did you fall asleep? No. I said, he was awake, because he would still be considered, but he was, he just not even able to pray with head movements, not able to do tayammum, etc. That they would be considered shuhada al-dunya as well. أو نقل عن المعركة, or they're transported away from the battlefield. حيا ليمرض, alive to be medically treated. Not out of, but they're not moved away out of fear of being trampled upon by the enemy horses or cattle. Because if they're moved away for that and the battle has not ended, right, and none of the rulings of living on were applied to them, then they're not considered murtath, to have lived on and experienced some of the worldly, engaged in worldly matters. Or if they gave a bequest, right? Whether it is a bequest for worldly matters, right? Give my money to so and so and so and so, or next worldly matters, which is, they advise their, like we see from the bequests from the councils of the righteous in the Quran, right? Where they advise their families with different things, right? Like Sayyidina Yaqub alayhi salam, so many of the righteous, they would give counsels at the end of their life, right? This is according to Abu Yusuf. Muhammad said that they're not considered murtath if they give wasiyah of next worldly matters, because people give that, especially the righteous, if they're about to die, they'd give next worldly advice. Also because the righteous, they would have taken care of their worldly affairs already. And it said the khilaf is only if they gave counsel on worldly things. They say, as for this property of mine, do this, do that. وقال الفقيه أبو جعفر, this is الهندواني, إنما يكون مرتثا إذا زادت الوصية على كلمتين، أما بالكلمة أو الكلمتين فلا تبطل الشهادة. And الفقيه أبو جعفر الهندواني said they're only considered to have lived on if their counsel was more than just a word or two. Right? Someone just said ittaqillah, died. Did they really live on? Right? As for just one word or two, that they're still considered min shuhada dunya. Right? أو باع أو اشترى أو تكلم بكلام كثير, or if they bought or sold or spoke extensively. بخلاف القليل, as opposed to just speaking a little. فإن من شهداء أحد من تكلم, because from the shuhada of Uhud are those who did speak. كسعد ibn al-Rabi', such as Sayyidina Sa'd ibn al-Rabi' رضي الله تعالى عنه. You can read, right, the riwayah of Sayyidina Zayd ibn Thabit, quoted in Tahtawi. وهذا كله إذا كان بعد انقضاء الحرب. And then Imam Shurunbulali reiterates, because the discussion is long, he emphasizes for clarity, this is all if the battle had finished. وإن وجد ما ذكر من الأكل ونحوه من مع الجراحة وكان قبل انقضاء الحرب لا يكون الشهيد مرتثا. But if all the aforementioned of eating and the like, eating, drinking, medical treatment, being transported away, time of prayer passing, giving wasiyah, etc., happened before the end of the war, لا يكون الشهيد مرتثا. They're not considered to have lived on after the battle. كذا قال الكمال. This was what's mentioned by al-Kamal. Why? Because there's a lot of discussion on this, right? So the role of al-Kamal ibn al-Imam is very significant, right? Um, he does many, many great things in his Fath al-Qadir. Um, وإذا اختلط, now he mentions some furu' to finish off. He says وإذا اختلط قتل المسلمين بقتل الكفار, if the Muslim deceased are mixed with the non-Muslim deceased, أو موتاهم بموتاهم, or they're dead with their dead, فإن كان المسلمون أكثر يصلى عليهم. If the Muslims are more, they are prayed over. وينوي المسلمين, and one intends the Muslims. وإلا فلا, otherwise not. Right? 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 إلا من عرف أنه من المسلمين, unless one knows specifically which are the Muslims. ويتخذ لهم مقبرة على حدة, and one takes a graveyard for these. So they're all mixed together. So one buries them separate from the Muslim graveyard, right? كذمية ماتت حبلى بمسلم. And the same thing, if a non-Muslim woman dies pregnant with a Muslim child, she's not buried with the Muslims, but she's buried separately, by her husband with the Muslim child. Right? And there's ikhtilaf amongst the Sahaba about this, right? And you can see the discussion on this in some of the books that explain the khilaf, right? So that, and then here, Imam al-Tahtawi says, "Wallahu subhanahu wa ta'ala a'lam wa astaghfirullah al-azim," and Allah knows best, and I seek Allah the Tremendous's forgiveness. Right? So that completes the section on prayer. Right? The section on prayer. Anytime one finishes a section, also, okay, where am I in understanding this chapter? Right? And sometimes even good to look at the index and say, okay, which chapters do I know well? Which ones do I need work on? And one should have a, consolidation plan. Because usually, one has chapters that one is weak on. So one should be active. Like, yes, one needs a comprehensive review. One also needs a specific review. What are the points where I'm weak on? Maybe 1 week, couple of weeks, you're distracted by getting married or trying to get married or planning your travels or whatever, or just slacking off for a little while, or some things you didn't review. So whatever different reasons. So you say, okay, these chapters I need to work on, right? And because sometimes one of the things to do, right, is from the tricks of the nafs for the seeker of knowledge, and just like the seeker of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, that tackle your problems, right? A lot of times we have our comfort zone. So you can't let's say the how izalat al-najasa. So you go back to your comfort. Tahara, I know wudu, I know ghusl, I know izalat al-najasa. So the talab al-ilm is not celebrating what you know, no, you're grateful for what you know, but the وَمَنْ وَجَدَ غَيْرَ ذَلِكَ فَلَا يَلُومَنَّ إِلَّا نَفْسَهُ. Whoever finds other than that, okay, let them only reproach themselves. What is positive reproach? Is change, right? Then make a plan of how you're going to get out of غَيْرَ ذَلِكَ. It's not the khair. You don't know things well. So the positive loam is to have a plan of changing. What do I do to get out of that? So there's, right, بإذن الله تعالى. And then next comes Kitab al-Sawm.